At the end of the 1800s, a new art form flickered into life. It looked like our dreams. Movies are a multi-billion-dollar global entertainment industry now. But what drives them isn't box office or showbiz. It's passion, innovation. So let's travel the world to find this innovation for ourselves. We'll discover it in this man, Stanley Donen, who made Singing in the Rain, and in Jane Campion in Australia, and in the films of Kyoko Kagawa, who was in perhaps the greatest movie ever made, and in Amitabh Bachchan, the most famous actor in the world, and in the movies of Martin Scorsese and Spike Lee, Lars von Trier and Akira Kurosawa. Welcome to the story of film, an odyssey, an epic tale of innovation across 12 decades, 6 continents, and 1,000 films. In this chapter, we meet the dazzling filmmaker Sergei Eisenstein and discover the glories of Japanese film in the 1930s. What great years for cinema were the 1920s and early 30s. Entertainment cinema was at its most glittering. Yet rebellious directors around the world challenged its glitter. This battle for the soul of cinema made it splendid. In entertainment romantic cinema of the 20s, people looked like this. Soft lighting, shallow focus, makeup, dreamlike. But as we've seen, some of the first rebels were the great realist directors who, in a scene like this, scrubbed mainstream cinema of its fantasy, its gloss, even its makeup. But this was only the beginning of the revolution against romantic cinema in these years. Around the world, 7 further sets of rebels saw in film new 20th century ways of getting beneath the surface of what it's like to be alive. Film was their laboratory. The glory of 20s and early 30s cinema was the result of their obsessions, ideas, and societies. After the realists, the second challenge to conventional cinema in the 20s came from this man, Ernst Lubitsch. At first he acted in movies. He's like an inept seducer, overacting, an adolescent almost. In the films he directed, he mocked the heavy-handed, almost Victorian way that sex and love were shown in the movies, and came up with a style that was all his own. This scene from his early film, The Oyster Princess, shows Lubitsch's mocking, subversive tone. A capitalist smokes a ridiculously fat cigar. He has an army of stenographers, and his assistants, of course, are all black. And few directors anywhere in the world were as visually daring as Lubitsch. In this film, The Mountain Cat, a girl falls in love with a lieutenant, so he gives her his heart. She eats it. Snowmen come to life and play music. The film's a riot of surreal production design. Its screen masking is even more daring. Such virtuosity was noticed by Hollywood, of course, and The Mountain Cat was Lubitsch's last film before moving there. American censorship meant that Lubitsch had to be inventive in how he portrayed sexuality there. Look at this scene in his hugely successful American film, The Marriage Circle. A psychiatrist and his wife are at breakfast. We see a close-up of an egg, then of a coffee cup. She stirs her coffee, then his hand disappears, then hers. The breakfast is pushed aside. A more urgent urge than that to eat has overtaken them. Lubitsch films nothing of their lovemaking, of course, but his use of objects is the cinematic equivalent of a raised eyebrow, far more daring in his suggestion of sexuality than Chaplin or Keaton or Lloyd. Lubitsch went on to make more sparkling comedies in America in the 30s and 40s and ran the Paramount studio. Billy Wilder, who made Double Indemnity and Some Like It Hot, had this sign on his office wall: "How would Lubitsch do it?" Where Lubitsch was innovative with film comedy, the third assault on the conventions of 20th cinema came from this city, Paris. The pioneering Lumière brothers had been influenced by Impressionist painters, and now filmmakers like Germaine Dulac, Abel Gance and Marcel L'Herbier used cinema in an Impressionist way too. Like this, our restless eyes darting around, scanning, not cutting. This showed how people actually see things and how mental images repeat and flicker. This film, La Rue, is a grand work of Impressionism. It strangely begins with images of its writer, producer, director, Abel Gance, then tells the story of a complex love triangle. One of the men in the triangle falls off a cliff. The woman he loves runs to save him. We feel fear for him. But then his own fear makes images of his beloved flash in his inner eye. We're inside his head. The movie screen becomes his inner eye. Romantic cinema had many cliffhangers, of course, but its images always had to be readable. Here, some of Gance's shots last just one frame, far too fast for us to take them in one by one. They flash past, giving us an impression of his final moments. The poet and filmmaker Jean Cocteau later said, "There's cinema before and after La Rue, just as there's painting before and after Picasso." The Soviet directors Podovkin, Eisenstein and Dovzhenko studied it in Moscow. But Gance hadn't yet peaked. In the following 4 years, he wrote, directed and edited a 4-hour Impressionist film about the early life of Napoleon Bonaparte, the French revolutionary, national leader and militarist, portraying its main character as a tragic hero and making mainstream romantic cinema look static in comparison. To capture the dynamism of the man, his fist fights and horse rides and battle charges and storms at sea, Gance rethought the camera's relationship to movement. Gance had a fur-covered sponge mounted around the lens so that the boys could punch right up to it and not get hurt. In the first scenes of Napoleon as a young man in Corsica, Gance attached a compressed air-powered camera to the saddle of a horse to capture Bonaparte's kinetic energy. How would Gance top such dynamism at the climax of the movie when Napoleon enters Italy? A land grab which the film fails to condemn? How would he outdo the epic imagery and grand sets of Pastrone's Cabiria and D.W. Griffith's Intolerance, which had come before? Here's the answer. He filmed with 3 cameras mounted on top of each other, each pointing in a slightly different direction. Audiences had to turn their heads to see the whole spectacle. Napoleon had its world premiere here, the Paris Opera. The Los Angeles Times called it the measure for all other films ever. But, despite such a claim, it was shown infrequently. In 1979, after a mammoth restoration of the negative by British historian Kevin Brownlow, Napoleon was triumphantly screened here at the Telluride Film Festival in Colorado. Gans, then aged 89, travelled to the screening and watched the film from his hotel room across the street from the outdoor cinema. The last time he saw his masterpiece of Impressionist filmmaking. In Germany in the late 1910s and 20s, the fourth innovative challenge to mainstream romantic cinema emerged. Directors wanted to show deeper aspects of the human mind than the French Impressionism of Abel Gance. Influenced by the so-called expressionist painters and theatre designers whose work was jagged like a broken mirror, they began making expressionist films. Less than 30 were made, but they were exported all around the world. Germany had just been defeated in an appalling war, but because it closed its borders to foreign films in 1916, its homegrown film industry was stimulated. The most influential of the expressionist movies was this one, The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, directed by Robert Wiener, which was made before Chaplin's first feature, or the accession of Emperor Hirohito in Japan. It was full of fear, haunting murders, graphic rooms. Where studio filmmakers filmed indoors, excluding daylight, and Scandinavians did the opposite, director Wiener and his chief designer, Herman Barm, found an apparently revolutionary third way. They flooded their set with flat light and then painted shadows directly onto the walls and floor. Cesare, a sleepwalker on show at fairgrounds, murders the enemies of his master, Dr. Caligari, at night. This story had a political edge. Caligari represented the controlling German state. Cesare represented ordinary people manipulated by it. But director Wiener and his producer Eric Pomer removed the film's political bite by adding this ending that showed that the whole thing was the dream of a madman, Fear, and that Dr. Caligari is not evil after all, and that the German state doesn't control its people. Filming took place here at the Babelsberg studio near Berlin. The film's bizarre imagery took the question of point of view in cinema further even than the French Impressionists. The film's spaces, sliced like shards of glass, its jagged lighting, showed the extreme mental state of Fear. Caligari has echoed down the years. This film, Charles Klein's Telltale Heart, shows its direct influence. The seminal British director Alfred Hitchcock, who had worked in Germany, made his first important film, The Lodger, with some of the shadowing and hysteria of Caligari. But the most astonishing outgrowth of the cabinet of Dr. Caligari came in Japan in the early 20s. Former actor Tainsuke Kunagasa saw it in Abel Gance's La Rue, and then made this film, A Page of Madness. This is the opening scene, a tempest, an asylum, visual overlays, fast cutting as in La Rue. A woman dancing in an Art Deco setting. The woman's in the asylum. In complex flashbacks, we found out that she's tried to drown her child. Her husband takes a job in the asylum to try to help her, but then his mental state deteriorates too. A Page of Madness goes further than Caligari because it's not just the central character who's psychotic. The film itself, its editing and imagery, seems psychotic too. Page of Madness combined the fleeting techniques of Impressionism with the deep unease of Expressionism, and is the second great Japanese film that exists after Souls on the Road. Back in Germany, Fritz Lang, the Viennese son of an architect, started making films about the deep structure of society rather than the surface claims it makes for itself. Lang made the most iconic film of the silent era, a movie that might have been made by an architect. Metropolis, set in the year 2000, tells the story of clashes between workers and an authoritarian industrialist in a giant city. Like a fantasy New York, roads and railways in the sky, brilliant model shots. A young woman, Maria, inspires the workers and is almost Christ-like, but the industrialist builds a robot that looks like her to manipulate the masses. The robot is a deco mannequin, lit with flashing lights, symmetrically framed. The astonishing opening eyes of the woman, enhanced by makeup. But in the end, Maria and the industrialist's son save the city, and workers and owners are united in a scene that seems to take place on the steps of a cathedral. Lang's cityscapes and robotics, exploitation and urban paradise were profoundly influential. The Hollywood director King Vidor loved Metropolis, and as a result, there are expressionist echoes of it in his city film, The Crowd. Adolf Hitler liked Metropolis, and the inmates of the Nazi concentration camp Mauthausen compared the huge ramp that they had to build to this one from Metropolis. Metropolis was shot here over a year and a half, using 2 million feet of film and 36,000 extras. Cities were scary things in the 20s, but poetic too. In this expressionist masterpiece, Sunrise, a man and wife walk through the world together, so wrapped up in each other they don't notice the traffic around them. The city becomes nature. And then city again. But then joy becomes tragedy. On the way back from the city, the wife seems to drown in a lake. Grief-stricken, the man blames the city and a woman from it. A woman who tried to seduce him. She showed him visions of bright light, of dancing. She's a symbol of greed and speed. Sunrise was made by the German director F.W. Murnau, one of the greatest directors who ever lived. This is him, the tall man in the extreme right, dancing in Sunrise, looking a bit awkward and shy as he did in real life. This is where he lived, although Murnau actually made the film in Hollywood. Unusually, he was offered total freedom to do so. He had this gigantic city set built and made most of the subtle lighting effects available in Hollywood. In the end, the city woman, the symbol of modernity and avarice, leaves, and the life of the man and the wife becomes like a German romantic painting. Sunrise was voted the best film of all time by French critics. The French poetic realists of the 1930s considered Murnau their master. He seemed to see into the human heart more than other directors and make haunting visuals. Murnau died in a car crash in California in 1931. This is his death mask. In both Germany and France in the 20s, movies had become intellectually fashionable. They were all the rage in art schools. And so it's no surprise that experimental artists and filmmakers pushed movies even further away from the Hollywood norms than German Expressionism. They were the fifth set of rebels to challenge conventional cinema in the 20s and 30s. Walter Ruttmann's Opus No. 1 looked like biology. He painted on glass, filmed the result, wiped the wet paint, added more and filmed again. One of the first abstract animations. Dada was an art movement of mockery, anarchy, comedy. In 1924, the Dadaist Francis Picabia commissioned this film, Entr'acte, to play in the interval in a ballet. René Clair, the former journalist who made it, put the camera in places that a conventional ballet could only dream of, right underneath the dancer, or at the barrel of a dancing cannon. Said Picabia of the result, "It respects nothing but the desire to burst out laughing." Also in France, the Brazilian Alberto Cavalcanti made this haunting experimental film. It was about seeing a city, its ordinary life, the power of imagery to reveal and evoke. Nearly 20 years later, the surrealist Salvador Dali used its imagery of multiple eyes in a dream sequence he designed for Alfred Hitchcock's film, Spellbound.
It seemed to be a gambling house. But there weren't any walls, just a lot of curtains with eyes painted on them.
Back in 1926, Dali had spent 3 years talking about dreams and desires with Luis Buñuel, a Spanish son of landowners. Inspired by this conversation, they wrote a screenplay for this film, Un chien andalou, directed by Buñuel. It starts with an image of Buñuel smoking. He has a cutthroat razor. He sees a cloud going across the moon, and either he or the film imagines it as something else. The razor cutting a woman's eye. A shocking free association, an attempt to show how the unconscious works. Then a man dressed as a woman falls off his bike. He's been carrying a box. This is the box. The man appears to the woman whose eye's been sliced. Ants are coming out of his hand, dissolve to a woman's armpit, and then a sea urchin. These last 3 shots are again free associations, holes, hair, maybe excitement and fear about sex. This was a wildly innovative way of editing. Un chien andalou was a direct influence in several later films, including David Lynch's Blue Velvet, especially this strange erotic discovery of an ant-covered ear. Buñuel's next film, the feature-length L'Âge d'Or, is still shocking. A man and a woman are trying to make love in the mud. A crowd of bourgeois people and clergy stops them. Then the man seems to have an image of the woman on a toilet. The toilet roll seems to burn, dissolve to lava. The film was premiered here on December the 3rd, 1930. Members of the Fascist League of Patriots hurled ink at the screen and attacked the audience. A Spanish newspaper called it the new poison which Judaism and Masonry want to use in order to corrupt the people. It was out of distribution for 50 years. If Buñuel and L'Âge d'Or completely rejected the content of romantic cinema, our sixth set of dissidents completely rejected its form.
Следующая станция – улица Сергея Эйзенштейна.
They were the most manic of them all. In two revolutions, Russia dashed to what it thought was modernity, tried to make society more equal, and violently removed its old ruling class. It set life in a spin. One of the children of the revolution, an early whiz kid, Dziga Vertov, whose name means spinning top, made this newsreel. The camera attached to a train, worshipping the work of peasants. The new boss of the Soviet Union, V.I. Lenin, said, "Of all the arts, for us cinema is the most important." Take a bow, Sergei Eisenstein, that art's most brilliant innovator. This is his first film. Actors perform, mug for the camera. Eisenstein was one of the most complex people in the story of film. He was a Marxist on the outside, and an engineer too, and perhaps a Christian inside that, and Jewish, and bisexual. He made this film about a mutiny on a battleship. The mutineer supporters on land come to pay their respects. Then the military opens fire. Eisenstein asked himself how he should show the horror of the murder. It said that he was eating a cherry and threw away the stone. Its bouncing down steps gave him an idea. Steps, he thought, are like the world tilted forwards to form a stage. Eisenstein decided to film the murder on such a stage. He'd cascade the murdered people down the steps. He'd studied landmine technology and so said that he needed a moment to detonate the murder. This is what he came up with. A huge caption, and 3 fast shots of a woman's head ricocheting. An umbrella. A fall shot with a handheld camera. The camera on a dolly beside the steps. Shots lasting on an average just 3 seconds. In American cinema of the 20s, shots averaged 5 seconds. In Germany, 9 seconds. Eisenstein cast this boy, asked him to fall. In real life, the boy was a goalkeeper, so was good at falling. His mother realizes her delayed reaction of the horror. Her face is a myth, a mask, primal. And then this horrific moment. And then this strange shot. She walks in a corridor of light. The camera's mostly been on the left, near the bottom of the steps, but then it's here, top right. A mother out of D.W. Griffith. Eisenstein adored Griffith. Her pram teeters. Her dying body pushes it. It becomes like the cherry stone. Falls through the killing field. hard to stop your heart racing at the Odessa step sequence. It's panic, which is what Eisenstein wanted. He called what we've just seen the montage of attractions. When we look at the Odessa step sequence on screen, the army stepping on the boy moves us. It leaps from the screen to us. Seeing the pram moves us. The emotions come from the screen to us. In our heads, the two things collide and create the idea of innocence slaughtered by the state, the Tsar. 1 + 1 = 3. Eisenstein says that he ploughed the mind of the audience. Battleship Potemkin premiered in this cinema, built in 1909, one of the oldest in the world. The film took the world by storm. Charlie Chaplin loved it. This is Eisenstein's stuff. Walt Disney admired Eisenstein. 62 years later, Brian De Palma paid homage to the Odessa step sequence in his violent American film, The Untouchables. The same pram, a distraught mother. We don't hear her screams, as if the film's silent. Splintered editing. Shots only a few seconds long, like Eisenstein. Peril, shooting down a grand staircase. Some say that Eisenstein's movies justify violence, but the keeper of his flame, historian Naum Kleiman, surrounded by Eisenstein's books, disagrees.
What Eisenstein did also in Potemkin is not a kind of school for revolutionaries. It was a very vulgar interpretation in the 30s that Eisenstein teaches how to make revolution. Just opposite for him, brother was the brotherhood as a law for the existence. And this film is a result of this idea of happiness on the earth and also peaceful life, and of the violence. This is actually, the film is against violence in any form. And if propaganda, then for brotherhood, but not for hate.
The humanism of Eisenstein. A humanism that's hard to miss, really. Eisenstein spotted humanism in another great Soviet director of the 20s. One night he went to the premiere of a film by this Ukrainian, Alexander Dovzhenko. As the film finished, Eisenstein said, "Mama, what goes on here?" Here's what goes on in Dovzhenko's film Arsenal. It's set at a complex time in Ukrainian political history. There's a war. Women stand motionless in the sunshine in dead villages. It's like the women can hear the song of the war inside their heads. A German goes mad with laughing gas. An astonishing image of a soldier dead, half buried, but smiling. Here's the greatest modern Russian director, Alexander Sokolov, on Dovzhenko.
Потому что он первым открыл чувство нам в изображении, первым показал практически, как можно выразить на экране атмосферу, быть безгранично искренним. Ну что необычного? Идет человек, молодой парень, идет по ночной дороге, пыльной, да? И от какого-то счастья начинает танцевать. Но что такого необычного? Вдруг в него стреляет, и он падает. сердце обрывается просто при этом. И начинаешь думать, ну почему? Что в этом такого, что до него этого никто не сделал? Ну почему? Это же так просто.
Here's the original screenplay of Dovzhenko's film, Arsenal. It's still housed in Vgik, the film school where Eisenstein taught, in this very room. Lenin died, of course, and Stalin came along, and the spinning, winning brilliance of Soviet editing died too. Eisenstein went on to create more masterpieces. Then he died in 1948. The seventh challenge to the Hollywood bauble, to romantic entertainment cinema in the 20s and early 30s, comes from a completely different world, the floating world, Japan. Japan fought most of the world in the 1930s and 40s, and, in its arrogance, killed millions. As if to compensate, as if in horror, its movie makers made the most humanistic films of their times. The most challenging of the films were made by the gentle rebel who's buried in this grave outside Tokyo. People cross the globe, as we did, to get here. As you can see, they leave whiskey and wine because the person who lies here was a drunk. There's no name on the grave, no date of birth or death, just the Japanese character, mu, nothingness, the void. The man who's buried here, Yasujiro Ozu, was a kind of philosopher, but, more importantly, perhaps the greatest director who ever lived. No interview footage of Ozu exists. He didn't marry, never worked in a factory, and didn't go to university. Yet for 30 years he made films about the calm lives of married people, factory workers, and students. He's thought of as a very serious director, yet the first movie in which his mature style emerged, this one, I Was Born But, is an exquisite zingy comedy about two boys, brothers. Naturalistic performances, filmed on a low tripod at the boy's height. They move to a new suburb. An existing gang of boys squares up to them. A battle of wills in a boyhood universe. The brothers think that their dad's a great man. Then they see him in an amateur film, goofing for his boss, an ordinary Joe, humiliated. This turns their lives upside down. They go on hunger strike. Legendary critic and filmmaker Donald Ritchie.
I Was Born But is a 1932 film, and it's a silent film, and they're very extremely rare. Almost all the I would say about 90% of all silent film has been destroyed in Japan by natural causes, the earthquake, or by unnatural causes like the bombing of Tokyo. Ozu himself said that it's supposed to be a comedy, but it came out sort of dark, says Ozu. And so this extraordinarily honest film, which tells a lot about society, a lot about kids, a lot about fathers, is something where the balance is so right that, of course, it's a masterpiece. And that's one of the many ironies of the film, is the boys have adjusted. The boys could adjust to anything. They adjusted to their empty stomachs when they ate their breakfast. They adjust to their father's being an idiot. They've adjusted to that. They're starting to adjust to the ways of the adult world, which, as their fathers told them, is a false world to live in. They'll probably never question it again. That what we saw was the last of their innocence. They've become equipped for society now.
Which is heartbreaking.
Yeah, because society isn't worth all that. And Ozu seems to be telling us that this kind of innocence, exemplified by the boys, is precious. And that would be one of the reasons it doesn't last.
The boys discover what Japan itself was about to discover in World War II, that the emperor is just an ordinary man. Ozu was the great dethroner. Unlike Akira Kurosawa, he didn't believe in heroes. Very un-Hollywood. The boys see that people are merely decent. Resignation and disappointment are a part of growing up. Ozu's brilliant at what it feels like to grow up, what the Japanese call mano no aware, the sadness of time passing. Here's Kyoko Kagawa, Japan's legendary actress, who worked for Kurosawa, Mitsuguchi, Naruza, and Ozu, who famously framed her in mid-shot, almost looking at the camera. Kagawa played the youngest daughter in Ozu's most acclaimed film, Tokyo Story. Late in the film, the mother takes ill, and the daughter fans her to cool her body.
例えば私の場合はお母さんが病気で倒れてでうちわでこう仰いであげてるカットがある。そして手を下ろしてこう時計を見て駅にお兄さんたち迎えに来ますっていうカットがあったんですけれども、うちわを3回だったかな5回だったか動かしたら手を下ろして時計を見てっておっしゃったんですね。だからその通りにやったんですけれども、その時になんかこう監督さんのこうリズムみたいなものが終わりなのかなって思ったんですけれど、だいたいカメラの位置が低くてこう床を見せないでこう低いとこう天井も入るし、なんか立体感が出るっていうか、なんかそういうお考えもあったように思いますね。
Kagawa's story gets to the crux of Ozu. He used film like no other director before or since. It was the norm in the 30s to have a camera at this height. Filming from hip height rather than shoulder height put the camera at the body's centre of gravity and, therefore, gave the image a better feeling of balance. This seldom happened in cinema. In the 70s, Chantal Akerman's groundbreaking film Jeanne Dielman was one of the few movies which used Ozu's camera height. And this was only the start of Ozu's innovations. As we've seen, actors' eye lines in mainstream cinema were usually like this, but in Ozu movies they were often here. In conventional films, when actors talked to each other, the camera would usually be at this angle to them, about 45 degrees. This, as we've seen, was to make it look as if the actors' eyes connected across the cut. Ozu brought his camera right round between the actors, into the scene at 90 degrees. The actors didn't seem to quite look at each other, but the composition of the images matched each other visually. Ozu was very interested in matching his shots, whether they were of human beings or, say, interiors in a house looking down a corridor. The more you watch, the more you feel the order of the space in his movies. His frames were windows on very balanced pictorial worlds. It follows that Ozu hated the human body to break the frame, and so he filmed from far enough back to ensure that if someone stood up, their head didn't disappear like this. And he used lenses of about 50 millimeters so that faces or spaces weren't overly bulging, as happens on a 20 or 30 millimeter lens. And he added pauses in his films. This boiling kettle doesn't just give the story a breather, it gives the space a breather too. It adds a moment of compositional emptiness, mu, the void, just as it says on his grave. Ozu, like the Renaissance artists, was interested in centering the human body and, like the Buddhists, in decentering the human ego. And as a result, his movies are far away from the straining emotional romanticism of Hollywood. They're the most balanced in movie history. It's hard to imagine any American director getting away with breaking the rules of filmmaking so completely. So how does Ozu get away with it? Part of the answer lies in the fact that the Japanese studio system was, in the 1920s and 30s, director rather than producer-led. These are the very rooms in Toho Studio where a future director, Akira Kurosawa, planned his seminal film, The Seven Samurai, in the 1950s. This man built some of his sets. Studios like these were what Orson Welles called the biggest train set in the world. Ozu, not a producer, would have called the shots in such spaces too. Another of Japan's great innovative directors who worked at the same time as Ozu and whose best work comes from the 30s and onwards was Kenji Mitsuguchi. Mitsuguchi's attitude was bang up-to-date modern. He attacked the arrogance of Japan, especially the noble pretensions of the samurai, and focused instead on Japanese women whose lives were made a misery. This film, for example, is about Ayoko, a telephone operator who for money reasons is forced into prostitution and is employed as a geisha. The topic was very personal for Mitsuguchi. He grew up in real poverty and his sister was sold to a geisha house. What's striking here is the boldness of the staging of the scene. Ayoko is in the extreme foreground, yet there's action in the far background. Such staging was very rare at the time and comes 5 years before Orson Welles' similar staging in Citizen Kane. The boy Kane, in the far background but still in focus, is having an idyllic childhood experience in the snow that he'll remember on his deathbed. The latter's visual boldness is rightly praised, but Mitsuguchi got there first. Kyoko Kagawa worked with Mitsuguchi much later in the 1950s.
で、溝口監督は一切演技指導をなさらない方なんです。で、セットに入りますと監督さんが椅子に座ってらして、じゃあやってみてくださいっておっしゃるだけなんですね。ですから俳優の演技をご覧になって、それからカメラの位置を決めるというそういう演出のなさり方だったもんですから。
In this film, Chikamatsu's story, she plays Osan, who's married to a pompous husband. In this scene, he thinks she's having an affair, so says that she should commit suicide. A devastating moment. In romantic cinema, it would have been shot close up and brightly lit, but Mitsuguchi cuts away from the expressed emotion behind Kagawa. So we can't see her distraught face. Instead of weeping with her, we feel moral indignation at her plight.
それとその水口監督が独特のおっしゃり方でしたけれども、そのリアクションを反射してください、相手の言葉とか動きに反射してください、それをよく見て反射してくださいということも本当に何べんも言われましたからね。だから芝居というのは自分の番が来たからセリフを言うとか言うんじゃなくて、相手の動きとかセリフに反応して初めて自分の動きと言葉が出てくるんだっていうことをとても教えられましたから、黒さん組の場合もやっぱりそういうシーンが多かったのでね、いつも反射と思ってやってました。
Kagawa's husband in Chikamatsu's story is so horrible that her character Osan flees with another man, Mohei. Mitsuguchi was known as a woman's director, and Kagawa feels that she learned much from him, especially in this scene.
何遍やってもOK が出なくて、で監督さんは一切そのどこが悪い、どこをこうしなさいっておっしゃらないもんですから、どうしていいかわからなくて、何回もテストしているうちに私は本当に疲れてしまって、全く意識なくこう転んでしまったんですね。バターンとこう胸も打ってしまったし、ものすごく痛かったんですけれども、でもそうした時にその瞬間にこうなんていうんですかね、自分でもわからないんだけど、この中からうわーっとこう湧き上がってくるような感情が感じまして、でそのままこっちにいるモヘイにそのままぶつかっていってラブシーンになるわけですけれども、そしたら監督さんが
「お前なくて生きていけると思ってるのか。お前はもうここにやない。私の夫よ、旦那様よ。悪ございました。悪ございました。
監督さんが本番行きましょうっておっしゃったんですね。ですからその時にその時は分からなかったんですけど、後から考えてやっぱり芝居というのは頭で考えてはいけないんだ、自分の体でぶつかっていく、それでもう余計なものを全部そぎ落として体でもう心からぶつかっていかなくちゃいけないんだなっていうことを教えられたと思うんですね。ですからそれが芝居の根本でなきゃいけないんだなっていうことを教えられた気がするんです。ですからカットは今でも忘れない。また自分が繰り返し見るたびにその時の自分の中の気持ちっていうのがね、また蘇ってくるんですね。
Back in the 30s, Mitsuguchi ended the story of telephonist Ayako with her on a bridge contemplating suicide because she's been labeled a delinquent woman. It's a key moment in the story of film.
野良犬や。どないしたらええかわからへんねん。
病気と違うか？
病気やわな。不良少女中、立派な病気やわ。なあ、お医者はん。
なんやねん。
こないになった女はどないして治さはんねん。
さあ、そら僕にもわからんわ。
Nearly a decade later, in an American film called Mildred Pierce, Joan Crawford finds herself on a similar bridge, contemplating a similar fate. Because this was Hollywood romantic cinema, of course, the attempted suicide is depicted beautifully, her face sculpted in light, shallow focus, emphasizing her eyes. It would take well nigh 2 decades before the achievements of Mitsuguchi and those of Ozu would be discovered, so to speak, by the romantic cinema of the West. One of the greatest oversights in movie history. The eighth and final alternative to Western mainstream cinema in the late 20s and 30s comes from here, China. In 1931, Japan brutally invaded China. Life was already difficult for most Chinese, but the ensuing war would see 13 million die. And at this very moment, Chinese cinema enters the story of film. There have been Chinese movies since the 1910s. This is typical. Period costumes, and iris used, as in Hollywood, to point out the suitor coming over the roof. But in the early 30s, China evolved a kind of leftist realist cinema that challenged Hollywood fantasy and, in a scene like this, used inventive camera angles and symbolism to show how some men really seduce women. This city, Shanghai, the Paris of the East, one of the most cosmopolitan cities in the world at the time, created that challenge. Film studios sprang up, great directors came to the fore, and movie stars were made. The greatest of them all was this woman, Ran Yu, often called the Chinese Greta Garbo. Here, she's a single mother at her son's school performance. Money's so tight that Rian has been forced to sell her body to pay for her son's education. A lovely tracking shot shows the whispers of disapproval. When the school hears of her prostitution, it shuns her and she's imprisoned. Women in particular identified with Rian.
懒人院，我们因为我们这个时间就是很小的时间，就看他们的片子比较多吧。因为我自己跟他们交面的还是比较少的，没有跟他真实的人我们没有看见。我们毕竟这个时间还是很小的了，很小。
就是拍的挺生动的啊，挺现实的，那个社会就是这样，对吧
Rian's movies were often set in Shanghai backstreets like this, though those shots were usually recreated on Shanghai movie sets like this. People say that realistic acting began with Marlon Brando in America, but look at Rian here, her weariness, her understated gestures, her body language. This is decades before Brando. When Maggie Cheung played Rian in the film Center Stage, director Stanley Kwan had her repeat this famous scene. In this film, New Women, Rian played a real-life actress who committed suicide after being hounded by the press. And here's the kick to this story. The prurient Shanghai tabloids trashed Rian's name because she was modern and realistic in a city of sparkle and cheap sex. In response, Rian took an overdose, like the character she played, and died in 1935, aged just 25. Her funeral procession was 3 miles long. 3 women committed suicide at it. The New York Times front page called it the most spectacular funeral of the century. Today, Rian appears in almost no film encyclopedias. In the coming decades, Shanghai, the city of sex and cinema, would build on top of its past and the alleyway settings of its great 30s films to become a Disneyland of capitalist consumption. It became something like a movie set. And by the 40s, a small promontory on the southeastern coast of the mainland had become the new centre of Chinese filmmaking in the south. That promontory was called Hong Kong. And so we get to the end of an era in film. Looking back on the years between the late 1910s and the early 30s, it's clear that they were dazzling, maybe the greatest period in the whole of the story of film. It was a time of fantasy cinema and its brilliant alternatives. Movies were on a high. This sublime tension should have lasted forever. But there's something obvious that we haven't yet mentioned. We didn't hear Doug's shout. We didn't hear Falconetti's voice. We didn't hear Cesare's nighttime victim scream. The energy or tenderness of these made a huge impression on us, but not as things in the real world do, because they were silent. What in France is called deaf cinema.